Just Bob here. Welcome to another exciting episode of Just a Podcast. Well, perhaps not exciting, but it's another episode in any case. I do sincerely appreciate you joining me today. Now, I had, a plan, I guess I should say, a plan or an agenda in mind for this episode. I was planning on talking about my trip to Indianapolis at the beginning of June, and I was going to tell you all about that, but I'm not ready to do so for a variety of reasons. I have a few things to straighten out, so that is probably going to happen next month that I'll do that. And so I was thinking, well, what should I talk about today? Because, this needed to be done, needs to be turned in, all that stuff. So I had an idea. I thought, what would be fun, and something I've been thinking about for a while, about taking an article I wrote a couple years ago for Thought Catalog entitled, "Read This If You're Thinking of Going Back to Your Ex," which was a sort of like a comedic thing that I thought was pretty funny, and I'd been wanting to do an audiobook version of it for a while. I came up with the idea a few months ago and just wasn't sure of what to do with it. I record this thing, but then what? And then I thought, well, I could share it with you. And so that is going to be the focus of today's podcast. So here we go. A few women I dated over the years decided that going back to an ex was better than going on with me. Aside from my bruised pride, there's a certain sense to this. After all, people are comforted by the familiar. This is why I will even now purchase a can of SpaghettiOs and Franks and eat them in ecstatic silence in a darkened room where I can fully embrace my shame. In any case, going back to an ex means that you can have the intimacy and everything else with someone you don't have to waste time getting to know. For people on the go, this might appear to be an attractive option, but there are a few things you should consider before attempting this. 1, the other person must have some interest in reconciling with you. Now, this might seem like a no-brainer, but you'd be surprised how many people exhibit little or no apparent brain activity. But if you're interested and they're interested, check this one off. And move on to number 2. Why did you break up in the first place? Now, I understand there is a great temptation to dismiss this notion, but don't. You might think we're past all that. We're more mature now and better able to work problems out. That's cute, but wrong. If you broke up because you're vegan and your ex is a carnivore, chances are this is still the case. You'll fight about it again. Probably regarding what restaurant to go to. How long has it been since you broke up? Now, you might be thinking that this question is not relevant because love. Come on, get real. People change. They evolve. Well, most people do. You might still be eating cereal in a recliner wearing nothing but moldy t-shirt and boxer shorts, but you're different. You're special and unique, and don't listen to anyone who says otherwise. The rest of the world has moved on the last 7 years. They've got a better job now. They're making more money. They have insurance and savings and a stock portfolio, and they even smell good. What I'm saying is, if they're successful and you're a loser, it probably won't work. If you're successful and they're a loser, the odds are on your side. If you were a loser before and so were they, you might have a shot. If you were a loser before and they were still successful, give up right now. You're wasting both our times. Number 4. If you're still reading, presumably you've cleared all of the above hurdles. Good for you. That storybook reconciliation is dead ahead. Or is it? Now, is it the person you miss or just the idea of them? Here's a good way to differentiate between the two. Picture your would-be sweetheart. Picture a nice plush blanket. If they're interchangeable, then you want the idea of them. So buy yourself a blanket and enjoy. If not, if the mention of their name gives you butterflies, see a doctor, because that's just weird. But if the idea of talking with them, touching them, looking in their eyes, and just generally being in the same place as they are turns you on, then good news. It's the person that you want. Now comes the hard part. You want them? They want you? Check. The reasons behind your breakup have been resolved to the satisfaction of both parties? Check. It hasn't been so long since the breakup that you've become strangers to one another? Check. You're into the person and not simply what they represent? Check. So what comes next? Ask yourself one question. If all the signs point to yes, as my magic 8-ball used to say, then why hasn't it happened yet? I told you this was the hard part. Does the problem lie with you? Are you a procrastinator, always putting things off until a tomorrow that never comes? Do you need to be motivated? Well, you shouldn't. If you love this person, then you would not be sitting here listening to this right now. You'd be running to them right now. If you're no longer with us, then I can only assume you're doing that. Of course, if you're no longer listening, then why am I still going on and on? So that's the article itself, and now a little bit of background. That was published in 2018, and it was written in a feverish scribble in about an hour or so. I had an idea. Now, the idea was several years old at that point. The thing that sparked my thinking happened around 2013 or so. But I had an episode that went down somewhat similar to what I said in the intro, which is, somebody I dated decided to end things with me and go back to an ex. And, it's like getting dumped is no fun, no matter what circumstances it happens in, usually. Usually there's some residual bad feelings or whatever. And this case was no different. I mean, I wasn't that broken up about it. I mean, this was not someone that I had spent a long period of time with. It was just, you go out with someone a couple times and it's good and all that. And then it ends, and so be it. I mean, that's life. That's what happens. But as it happened, this person that I'm speaking about had a number of friends in common with me, and so I found out what happens after that. Because a lot of times, you get dumped, and that person goes on, and they become like a blank slate from that point on. You don't know what's become of them or whatever. But in this case, I did, and what made it better was I was able to have this knowledge without having to be too close to the situation. Like sometimes you see someone that you were with and they go on and they're happy and you're like, man, you're maybe a little resentful, But in this case, that was not the case. But what happened was, this person ended things with me, went back to an ex, and the ex exhibited the same sort of questionable behavior that prompted the two of them ending their relationship in the first place. Well, there was, some untruths happening, and some deception happening, and it was a bad situation. So they split, and now they're giving it a second go round, and the same thing happened. And that was something that just sort of lodged itself in the back of my brain. And a lot of times I will have an idea because I'm a frustrated writer. I always have been. I was a writer before I got into radio, and even before I became a musician. I won an essay contest. This is a true story. I won an essay contest when I was in the 4th grade, and it was regarding the 1984 Summer Olympic Games, which were a few months away at that point in time. And I won 3rd prize, and the contest was sponsored by Stewart Hall Stationery. And so they sent me this big box full of school supplies. And, remember, I was 10 years old, but they sent me this big box of school supplies. It was a bunch of notebooks and a bunch of pens and pencils and stuff like that. And I had school supplies that stuff in that box lasted me 2 or 3 years. So that was pretty cool. But I won this essay contest, and I had always enjoyed writing. And, the problem was I didn't really have the discipline that being a writer requires, and because a lot of times when you're a writer, you come out with the idea and then you put it down on paper or whatever, and then there's revision and there's editing and all that stuff. And the revision and editing and all that stuff didn't appeal to me. I wanted to furiously write the idea down and then chuck it out in the world. And, when you're 10 years old, you don't really have an understanding of how actual jobs work, because you've never done one at that age. And so as I got older, I came to understand it a little better. But, the idea of sending out samples and stuff like that, it just was not a thing that I could get on board with. And so, I continued to write, but not so much as like a freelancer, like the idea of someone giving me an assignment. I didn't like that. It felt too much like school, It's like that's what they do at school. They tell you write something about this, and then you have to do it, and there's a deadline and all that stuff. And this was the same kind of thing. And me, I was much happier writing about things that interested me, and so I began to devote a lot of my efforts that way into writing fiction. And I wrote a book that ended up getting published, and that was fun. And that kind of overlapped with my beginning in radio, because that was, when I first started working at Verstandig Media, I was part-time, and I did overnights, and I had a lot of free time. I mean, I'm sitting here in the middle of the night, and so I had an idea for a story, and I just scribbled it down on pieces of paper, and I would collect a pile of these sheets of paper. I would take them home, and I would type them into Microsoft Word on my computer at home. And it took a while. It took about 2 years or so for me to finish my novel, but eventually I did, and I was able to get it published, and this was through Amazon, and it wasn't really like a case where I wanted to like have a bestseller or whatever. I mean, it would have been nice, and don't get me wrong, but for me it was as much because this was not something that I was sort of depending on, to make my living. So it was like, it was just something I did for fun, and that was great, and it's something that I enjoyed. And then at some point after that, I discovered Thought Catalog. Thought Catalog's a website. They publish submissions from readers, about any subject, and a lot of it is relationship stuff, and a lot of it is like horoscopes and stuff like that. And when I had an idea that would end up filling a couple pages, like the article I read to you today is just over a page long. It's not long. And I wrote, over the years, I wrote a bunch of stuff that was similar. And so I would send it in there, and had a couple of articles published around 2014. And then they rejected a bunch of stuff. I wrote about 4 or 5 articles that got rejected, and then they accepted a couple more. And this one that I read you today was the last one, I believe. One of the last ones. And after that, I just kind of lost interest in it. Because that's the problem. You're not going to make a living at something that you do in such a fitful manner, And that was, I think, in the early days, what led me to realize that I get a lot more out of doing radio than I do out of freelance writing. And I enjoy it a lot more, and it's a lot more immediate. And I can take a lot of those same skills of hatching an idea and seeing it through to conclusion and then putting it before an audience all in one day, that I saw as a great challenge. So that's just a little bit of my background here, and my history. I hope you enjoyed it. I know a lot of times these podcast episodes are very scattershot, and I'm all over the place. I try not to plan them out too much, because I kind of feel like, on one hand, there's something to be said for the creative aspect of it, the spontaneity, and on the other, I think it becomes a little bit rote to just sort of, plan things out to the 4th decimal place. So I try and do it that way, so that it's a little more interesting for you to listen to, and it's a little more interesting for me to produce. But next time, we're going to get into traveling again. I'll tell you about my Indianapolis experience, and we'll get into some details about that. But I'm going to wrap up right now, but I want to say thank you for listening. I really do appreciate it. When I record these things, I always think, is anybody going to listen to this, let alone listen all the way through? And if you made it to this point, then you've listened all the way through, and I'm deeply grateful for that. So until next time, I'm Just Bob, signing off. Thanks. Have a good one.